Welcome to Global Blueprint, a go-to channel for politics, economics, and global affairs. The evolution of U.S. foreign policy doctrines in the 1990s, from the Wolfowitz Doctrine to Huntington and Brzezinski, implications for the 21st century and the Ukraine War. The 1990s marked a pivotal era in U.S. foreign policy, shaped by the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. With the bipolar world order dissolving, U.S. policymakers and intellectuals sought new frameworks to guide American global dominance. This period saw the emergence of several influential doctrines and theories, most notably the Wolfowitz Doctrine, Samuel Huntington's The Clash of Civilizations, and Zbigniew Brzezinski's The Grand Chessboard, that not only defined post-Cold War strategy, but also laid the intellectual groundwork for U.S. foreign policy in the 21st century. These doctrines, while distinct in focus, shared a common objective: to ensure U.S. global hegemony by shaping international relations through military dominance, cultural narratives, and geopolitical strategy. Their influence persists today, particularly in the context of the Ukraine War, which has become a focal point of U.S. efforts to contain Russian influence and uphold the liberal international order. The Wolfowitz Doctrine, the blueprint for unipolar supremacy, origins and core principles. The Wolfowitz Doctrine, formerly known as the Defense Policy Guidance, 1992, was authored by Paul Wolfowitz and Scooter Libby under the direction of Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney during the George H.W. Bush administration. The document outlined a strategy for maintaining U.S. global dominance in the post-Cold War era by preventing the emergence of any rival superpower or regional hegemon. Key tenets included preventing the rise of a new peer competitor, particularly in Eurasia, maintaining U.S. military superiority and the capacity for unilateral action, deterrence of allies from developing independent defense capabilities that could challenge U.S. leadership, emphasis on preemption and decisive military power to shape global outcomes. The original draft was criticized for its imperialist tone, especially its suggestion that the U.S. should not hesitate to act unilaterally if necessary. It was revised to soften its language, but the core ideas remained embedded in U.S. strategic thinking. Influence on U.S. foreign policy. The Wolfowitz Doctrine laid the foundation for the Bush Doctrine, 2002, which justified the invasion of Iraq under the pretext of preemptive action against weapons of mass destruction. It also informed the broader strategy of U.S. military interventionism, particularly in the Middle East. Even after the end of the Cold War, the U.S. maintained a vast global military presence, justified by the need to prevent the rise of any power capable of challenging American supremacy. This doctrine has been a guiding principle in U.S. foreign policy, influencing decisions from the NATO expansion to the war on terror and the current containment of China and Russia.
Huntington's Clash of Civilizations, Cultural Framing of Global Conflict. The thesis: Samuel P. Huntington's Clash of Civilizations theory, first published in Foreign Affairs in 1993 and later expanded into a book in 1996, argued that future global conflicts would not be ideological or economic, but cultural in nature. He identified 9 major civilizations, including Western, Islamic, Sinic, Chinese, Orthodox, Latin American, African, Buddhist, Hindu, and Japanese, and predicted that the most dangerous conflicts would occur at the fault lines between civilizations. Huntington warned that the West's attempt to impose its values on other civilizations would provoke resistance, particularly from the Islamic world and China. He emphasized the importance of civilizational identity as a more enduring and divisive force than political ideology or economic interest. Impact on U.S. foreign policy. Huntington's theory gained traction after the 9/11 attacks, which were interpreted by many in the U.S. as a confirmation of his predictions. The war on terror, especially the invasion of Iraq, was often framed in cultural and civilizational terms, with the U.S. portraying itself as defending Western values against radical Islam. However, critics argue that Huntington's theory oversimplifies complex geopolitical realities and essentializes cultures, ignoring internal diversity and the potential for cooperation. Despite its flaws, the narrative of a clash between the West and the Islamic world has persisted in U.S. foreign policy rhetoric, contributing to militarism, Islamophobia, and interventionism.
Brzezinski's The Grand Chessboard, Geopolitical Strategy for Eurasia. The Geopolitical Vision. Zbigniew Brzezinski's The Grand Chessboard, 1997, offered a geopolitical roadmap for U.S. global dominance in the post-Cold War era. As a former national security advisor, Brzezinski argued that Eurasia was the key to global power due to its vast resources and strategic location. He identified 5 critical regions: Russia, Ukraine, Central Asia, China, and the Middle East. Brzezinski emphasized that, to maintain global supremacy, the U.S. must ensure that no single power dominates Eurasia. He warned that a Sino-Russian alliance or a resurgent Russia could threaten U.S. primacy. Policy implications. Brzezinski's ideas influenced U.S. policies of NATO expansion, containment of Russia, and strategic engagement with Eastern Europe and Central Asia. His advocacy for U.S. support for Ukraine as a buffer against Russia has had a lasting impact, especially in the context of the current Ukraine war. Brzezinski famously stated in 1994, "Without Ukraine, Russia ceases to be an empire. But with Ukraine subordinated and then defeated and absorbed, it automatically becomes an empire." This quote underscores the central role of Ukraine in U.S. geopolitical strategy. Synthesis. The interplay of doctrines and their legacy. Overlapping themes. While each of these frameworks emerged from different intellectual traditions, Wolfowitz from realism, Huntington from culturalism, and Brzezinski from geopolitical strategy, they share several key themes. Prevention of peer competition. All 3 emphasize the need to prevent the rise of a rival capable of challenging U.S. dominance. Primacy of U.S. global leadership. Each framework assumes the U.S. must remain the sole global superpower. Use of military and strategic tools, whether through unilateral force, Wolfowitz, cultural narratives, Huntington, or geopolitical maneuvering, Brzezinski, all advocate for active U.S. interventionism. Focus on Eurasia. Both Brzezinski and Wolfowitz highlight the importance of Eurasia, particularly in containing Russia and China. Critique. Despite their influence, these doctrines have also been criticized for fostering militarism, oversimplifying global dynamics, and alienating non-Western powers. The Iraq War, for example, was justified using a combination of Wolfowitz-style preemption and Huntingtonian cultural framing, leading to disastrous consequences. Similarly, NATO expansion, guided by Brzezinski's logic, has been cited as a factor in provoking Russian aggression, particularly in Ukraine. The Ukraine War, a test of 1990s doctrines in the 21st century. Brzezinski's legacy in Ukraine. The Ukraine War, 2022-present, is a direct manifestation of Brzezinski's geopolitical vision. The U.S. has framed its support for Ukraine as a defense of sovereignty, democracy, and the rules-based international order. But underlying this is a strategic calculation: preventing Russian dominance over Eurasia. Ukraine's strategic location, bordering Russia, situated between NATO and the EU, makes it a critical geopolitical chess piece. The U.S. has provided military, economic, and diplomatic support to Ukraine, aiming to weaken Russia and deter further aggression. Wolfowitz Doctrine and the logic of containment. The U.S. approach to Russia in the Ukraine war echoes the Wolfowitz Doctrine's logic of containment. Just as the original doctrine sought to prevent the rise of any rival, the U.S. now seeks to ensure that Russia cannot re-emerge as a major global power. This is evident in the sanctions regime, arms deliveries, and efforts to isolate Russia diplomatically. Huntington's shadow. Civilization versus barbarism? While the war is not framed explicitly in civilizational terms, Huntingtonian narratives have subtly influenced the discourse. Western media and leaders often depict the conflict as a struggle between democracy and autocracy, civilization and barbarism, reinforcing the idea of an irreconcilable divide between the West and authoritarian regimes. This narrative, while politically expedient, risks deepening divisions, justifying escalation, and undermining diplomatic solutions. The enduring influence of 1990s doctrines. The foreign policy doctrines of the 1990s, Wolfowitz, Huntington, and Brzezinski, continue to shape U.S. global strategy in the 21st century. They have provided the intellectual scaffolding for U.S. interventions, alliances, and strategic calculations, particularly in the context of great power competition. The Ukraine war serves as a case study of how these doctrines are applied in practice with real-world consequences for global stability. While they offer frameworks for understanding international relations, their militaristic, essentialist, and zero-sum logic has also contributed to conflict, polarization, and overreach. As the U.S. faces new challenges, from China's rise to climate change, global inequality, and pandemics, it may be time to reassess these Cold War-era paradigms and embrace more cooperative, inclusive, and sustainable approaches to global governance. Thanks for listening. See you next time on Global Blueprint.